Maria Castellanos wiped the sweat from her forehead as she looked down the dusty road ahead. The sun was beating down hard and her feet hurt with every step. But she couldn't stop, not now. Not when her 3 children were sitting at home with empty stomachs, waiting for her to bring back anything to eat. It had been 3 months since her husband died. 3 long, painful months of watching everything fall apart. First, the crops dried up because there was no rain. Then the animals started dying one by one. Her husband had worked himself to exhaustion trying to save their small farm. But in the end, his heart just gave out. The doctor said it was the stress and the heat. Maria knew it was a broken spirit. Now she was walking alone on this road, heading toward a place she never thought she would go. The Double R Ranch, everyone in the county knew about it. More importantly, everyone knew about the man who owned it. Big Tom Reeves. Just hearing his name made people nervous. Maria had heard all the stories. How he had taken over farms when people couldn't pay their debts. How he never smiled, never showed mercy. How he had built his empire by being tougher than the tough Texas land itself. People said his heart was made of the same dry clay that covered the ground during drought season. But Maria was out of options. She had sold everything she could sell. The furniture, the tools, even her mother's dishes. The only thing left was the ring on her finger. Her grandmother's wedding ring. It was simple, just a thin gold band, but it meant everything to her family's history. Her children were waiting at home. Rosa was 10 years old, trying so hard to be brave and take care of her younger brothers. Miguel was 7, and he had stopped asking when they would eat properly again. But it was little Carlos who broke Maria's heart the most. He was only 4, and he didn't understand why his stomach hurt all the time. Yesterday, he had asked her if they could eat the flowers from the yard. That's when Maria knew she had to do something desperate. The gates of the Double R Ranch finally came into view. They were huge, made of wood and iron, with the ranch's brand burned into the wood. Maria stopped for a moment and looked at them. Her legs felt weak, and not just from the 12-mile walk. She was scared. What if the stories were true? What if Big Tom just laughed at her and sent her away? But then she thought about Rosa's thin face, about Miguel's quiet sadness, about little Carlos asking about the flowers. She took a deep breath and walked through those gates. The ranch was bigger than she had imagined. There were buildings everywhere. Barns, stables, storage houses. She could see cattle in the distance, more cattle than she could count. Workers were moving around, doing their jobs. Some of them stopped and stared at her as she walked past. A woman in a worn-out dress, covered in dust, clearly didn't belong here. Maria kept her eyes forward. She could feel them watching her, probably wondering what she was doing here. Maybe they had seen this before. Maybe other desperate people had walked this same path, hoping for help that never came. The main house stood at the center of everything. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid and big, built to last just like everything else on this ranch. Maria could see a man standing on the porch. Even from a distance, she could tell it was him. Big Tom Reeves. He was enormous, taller than any man she had ever seen, with shoulders as wide as a barn door. His face was weathered from years in the sun, and even from where she stood, she could see that he wasn't smiling. He was just watching her walk toward him, his expression giving nothing away. Maria's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Every step closer made her more nervous, but she couldn't turn back now. She thought about her children again. That's what kept her feet moving forward. When she reached the porch, she had to look up to see his face. He didn't say anything, just stood there waiting. Some of his workers had gathered at a distance, watching. Maria realized this was probably entertainment for them. The desperate widow coming to beg from the man who never helped anyone. Her throat was so dry she could barely speak. But she forced the words out. She told him about her husband, about the drought and the failed crops, about 3 children who hadn't had a proper meal in days. Her voice shook as she spoke, and she hated how weak she sounded. But she couldn't help it. Big Tom's face didn't change. He just stood there like a statue, listening but showing nothing. No sympathy, no anger, no interest, nothing. It was like talking to a wall. Maria felt panic rising in her chest. This wasn't working. He was going to send her away. She had walked 12 miles in the heat for nothing. Her children would go to bed hungry again tonight. She had to try something else. That's when she looked down at her hand, at the ring her grandmother had worn for 50 years. The ring her mother had passed down to her on her wedding day. The last piece of her family's history that remained. She felt tears starting to come, but she blinked them back. She couldn't cry. Not yet. With trembling fingers, Maria pulled the ring off. It stuck a little because her hands were swollen from work and heat, but she got it off. She held it out toward Big Tom, her arm shaking. The words came out as barely more than a whisper, but loud enough for everyone to hear in the quiet afternoon air. Words that would change everything, though she didn't know it yet. Words that came from the deepest part of a mother's love and desperation. "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "My children are starving." She held the ring higher, making sure he could see it in the sunlight. The simple gold band caught the light, gleaming despite its age and simplicity. "This ring is all I have left of my family's past. Take it for just enough food to keep them alive. I'm not asking for charity. I'll work. I'll do anything. Just please help me feed my children." The tears came now running down her dusty cheeks. She couldn't stop them anymore. She stood there with her arm outstretched, offering the last valuable thing she owned to a man who supposedly had no heart. The workers watched in silence. Some of them looked uncomfortable. They had probably seen Big Tom turn away desperate people before. Maria kept her arm up even though it was starting to ache. She wouldn't lower it. She couldn't. This was her last chance. If he said no, she didn't know what she would do. Go home and watch her children waste away? The thought was unbearable. Big Tom stared at the ring. Then he stared at her. His face was still unreadable, that same stone expression everyone talked about. Maria felt her hope starting to die. He was going to refuse. She could feel it. Then he did something she didn't expect. He turned around and walked into the house without saying a single word. He just left her standing there, her arm still outstretched, the ring catching the afternoon sun. Maria didn't know what to do. Should she leave? Should she wait? The workers were whispering now, probably telling each other that Big Tom had just dismissed another beggar. Maria's arm started to shake from holding it up so long. The ring felt heavier than it should. She felt like a fool, standing there with her hand out while the man had walked away. But she couldn't move. Where would she go? Back to her children with nothing? The door of the house opened again. Maria's heart jumped. Big Tom was coming back out, and he was carrying something. No, several things. Big cloth sacks that looked heavy. He walked down the porch steps and set them at her feet. Maria stared at them, not understanding at first. Then she saw what was inside. Flour, beans, salt pork, cornmeal, real food. More food than she had seen in months. Her breath caught in her throat. Big Tom looked down at her hand, still holding out the ring. When he spoke, his voice was rough, like he didn't use it much for kindness. "Keep your ring," he said. Thomas Reeves hadn't always been called Big Tom. As a young man, people just called him Tom. But somewhere along the way, after he grew to 6 feet 7 inches and built shoulders that could carry fence posts like they were toothpicks, the nickname stuck. Big Tom. It fit him in more ways than one. He had arrived in Texas with nothing but $20 and a strong back. That was 40 years ago. Now he owned the biggest ranch in 3 counties. People often asked him how he did it. He never gave them a real answer. The truth was simple but hard. He had worked when others slept. He had saved when others spent. And when opportunities came, usually when someone else was failing, he took them. That last part was what gave him his reputation. Big Tom had foreclosed on more farms than anyone could count. When the banks wouldn't lend anymore, he would, but his terms were strict and he never bent the rules. Pay on time or lose your land. It was that simple. Cold, maybe, but business was business. The ranchers in the area respected him, but didn't like him. The farmers feared him. The townspeople whispered about him at church on Sundays, though never loud enough for him to hear. They said he had ice water in his veins, that he could watch a family lose everything and not blink an eye, that making money was the only thing that mattered to him. Big Tom had heard all the stories about himself. Some were true, some weren't. He didn't bother correcting any of them. Let people think what they wanted. Their opinions didn't pay the bills or keep the ranch running. His workers knew a different side of him, though it wasn't much warmer. He paid fair wages, always on time. The food in the bunkhouse was good and plenty. If a worker got injured, Tom made sure they saw a doctor, but he demanded hard work in return. No laziness, no excuses, no second chances if you stole from him or caused trouble. The foreman, a man named Pete who had worked for Tom for 15 years, once told a new ranch hand, Boss is fair, but he ain't friendly. Do your job, stay out of trouble, and you'll be fine. But don't expect him to chat with you or care about your problems. He's got a ranch to run, and that's all he thinks about. That was mostly true. Tom woke up before sunrise every day and worked until dark. He knew every corner of his property. He could tell if a fence needed fixing just by looking at it. He knew which cattle were sick before they showed symptoms. He understood the land and the business better than anyone. What people didn't understand was why he pushed so hard. He already had more money than he could spend. The ranch was successful beyond what most men dreamed of. So why did he keep working? Like a man who had nothing. Why did he keep buying more land, more cattle, building a bigger and bigger empire? Old Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper, was one of the few people who had been around long enough to know the real answer. But she never told anyone. It wasn't her story to tell. She just cooked his meals, cleaned his house, and watched him live in that big, empty home like a ghost haunting his own life. The house itself told a story if you knew how to read it. It was well built and solid, but cold. No pictures on the walls, no decorations, no softness anywhere. Just furniture that served a purpose and nothing more. The only room that looked different was one upstairs that was always locked. Mrs. Chen had a key, but she only went in there once a month to dust. She never stayed long. In town, people loved to talk about Big Tom, especially when something reminded them of his hardness. Like the time the widow Henderson came to him for help. Her husband had owed Tom money, and after he died, she couldn't pay. Tom foreclosed on the farm within a month. People were outraged. How could he throw a widow off her land? But what people didn't know was that Tom had quietly arranged for her to have a job at the general store in town, with a small house behind it. He paid the store owner to hire her and never told anyone. The store owner kept the secret because Tom asked him to, and because arguing with Tom Reeves was not a smart idea. There were other stories like that, little things Tom did that no one knew about. But there weren't many, and they didn't change his overall reputation. He was still the man who had foreclosed on dozens of properties, who had never been seen to smile, who seemed to care about nothing except his ranch and his money. The workers on the ranch sometimes wondered about him. On quiet evenings, when they sat around after dinner, they would swap theories. Maybe he had his heart broken once, one would say. Maybe he's just mean by nature, another would counter. Maybe he's just smart and knows that being soft in this business gets you nowhere, a third would offer. Pete, the foreman, usually ended these conversations the same way. Don't matter what made him how he is. This is who he is now, and he's the boss, so that's that. The day Maria Castellanos walked through those ranch gates, Big Tom was having a normal day. He had been up since 4 a.m, checked on the cattle in the north pasture, fixed a water pump that was acting up, reviewed the books in his office, made decisions about which steers to sell and when. He was standing on his porch, taking a rare moment of rest when he saw her coming up the path. A thin woman in a faded dress walking with determination despite obvious exhaustion. Tom knew immediately what this was. Someone coming to ask for help. Someone who was desperate. He had seen it many times before. The walk of someone who had run out of options. The way they held their shoulders, trying to look dignified even though they were coming to beg. Tom usually sent these people away quickly. It was easier that way, less complicated. But something made him wait this time. Maybe it was the way. She kept walking even though she must have seen him watching. Most people hesitated when they got close, their courage failing. But this woman just kept coming. His workers had noticed her too. They were trying not to stare, but Tom could see them watching from various parts of the ranch. They probably wondered what he would do. Would he send her away immediately, or would he at least listen first? When Maria reached the porch and looked up at him, Tom saw the fear in her eyes. But he also saw determination. And something else. A kind of desperate strength that came from having no choice but to be strong. She started talking, explaining her situation. Husband dead, children hungry, no money, no options. Tom had heard versions of this story before. He kept his face neutral, showing nothing. It was easier to say no if you didn't show any emotion. But then she did something that surprised him. She pulled off her wedding ring. Tom could see her hands shaking as she held it out. This wasn't just any ring. He could tell by the way she held it, by the pain in her eyes. This meant something to her. "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "My children are starving." Tom stared at the ring. A simple gold band, nothing fancy, probably not worth much money, but worth everything to the woman holding it. She was offering to sell her memories, her connection to her past, just to feed her children. The workers had gone quiet. Everyone was watching now, waiting to see what Big Tom Reeves would do. Would he take the ring? Would he send her away? This was the moment that would give them another story to tell about the heartless rancher. Tom felt something shift inside him, something he had kept buried for so long he had almost forgotten it was there. He looked at this desperate mother, holding out the last valuable thing she owned, and suddenly, he wasn't standing on his porch anymore. He was somewhere else. A different time, a different porch, different faces. Faces he had locked away in that room upstairs and tried never to think about. The feeling passed quickly. Tom had practice at pushing feelings away, but it had been there just for a moment, long enough to change what he did next. He turned without a word and walked into his house. Behind him he could hear the confused silence. Let them wonder. He knew what he was doing even if he didn't fully understand why. Maria stood frozen with her arm still extended, the ring catching the afternoon sunlight. Big Tom had just walked into his house without a word, leaving her there. She didn't know what to do. Should she wait? Should she leave? Her arm was getting tired, but she was afraid to lower it, as if keeping the ring held out might somehow bring him back with a different answer. The ranch workers were still watching. She could feel their eyes on her. Some looked away when she glanced in their direction, embarrassed for her. Others just stared with curiosity, probably wondering how long she would stand there like a fool before giving up and going home. Maria's mind raced. Maybe he went inside to get someone to escort her off the property. Maybe he was so disgusted by her request that he couldn't even bother to say no to her face. Maybe this whole trip had been a waste of time, and now she would have to walk 12 miles back with nothing to show for it except sore feet and crushed hope. She thought about her children waiting at home. Rosa was probably trying to make something out of nothing for dinner. Maybe boiling water with a few old vegetables to make a thin soup. Miguel was probably sitting quietly in the corner, that sad look on his face that broke her heart. And little Carlos was probably asking when Mama would be home, asking if she was bringing food. Tears started running down Maria's cheeks again. She didn't try to stop them this time. What was the point? Everyone here already knew she was desperate. Crying wasn't going to make it worse. Nothing could make this worse. Just when she was about to lower her arm and leave, the door opened. Big Tom came back out and he was carrying something. Several large cloth sacks. They looked heavy the way he carried them. Maria blinked, trying to understand what was happening. He walked down the porch steps without looking at her face and set the sacks at her feet. The thud they made hitting the ground told her they were full of something substantial. Maria stared down at them, her mind not quite processing what she was seeing. One sack had split slightly and she could see white flour inside. Another had dried beans visible through the weave of the cloth. Her eyes went wide. This was food, real food, more food than she had seen in months. "Keep your ring," Big Tom said, his voice gruff. Maria looked up at him, shocked. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked back down at the food, then at the ring still in her outstretched hand, then back up at his face. This couldn't be real. Men like Big Tom Reeves didn't just give away food to strangers. "I don't understand," she managed to whisper. Big Tom's expression didn't change much, but his eyes weren't quite as hard as before. "A woman shouldn't have to sell her memories to feed her children," he said. Maria felt like her legs might give out. This was really happening. He was giving her food. Enough food to feed her children for weeks, maybe months. And he didn't want her ring. She looked down at the simple gold band in her hand, the ring that had been ready to trade away her entire family history, and fresh tears came. But before she could thank him, before she could say anything, Big Tom spoke again. "Be here Monday morning. Dawn. There's laundry that needs doing, cooking, mending. The house needs proper attention, and Mrs. Chen is getting too old to handle it all herself." Maria looked up at him, not quite believing what she was hearing. "You'll work for your wages," he continued, his tone making it clear this was business, not charity. Fair pay for fair work. Your children can help in the kitchens when they're strong enough. We feed our workers 3 meals a day. 3 meals a day. The words seemed impossible. Maria tried to speak, but her voice wouldn't work. She just nodded, tears streaming down her face. Can you be here Monday? Big Tom asked, watching her face. Yes, Maria managed to croak out. Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much. Big Tom nodded once, then turned to one of the ranch hands who had been watching. Rodriguez, get the wagon. Help Mrs. Castellanos take these supplies home. The ranch hand, a young man with kind eyes, immediately moved to follow the order. Yes, boss, he said, heading toward the barn. Big Tom looked back at Maria one more time. Monday dawn, don't be late. I won't be, Maria promised. I'll be here. I promise. Big Tom nodded again, then turned and walked back into his house. Just like that, the conversation was over. Maria stood there for a moment, still holding her ring, staring at the sacks of food at her feet. She couldn't quite believe what had just happened. The other ranch workers had started moving again, going back to their tasks, but she could see them glancing her way. They looked as surprised as she felt. A few were whispering to each other. This was clearly not normal behavior from their boss. Ma'am? The young ranch hand Rodriguez had brought a wagon around. He hopped down and started loading the sacks. I'll take you home. Boss's orders. Thank you, Maria said softly, finally slipping her ring back onto her finger. It felt different now somehow. Heavier. More precious than it had been an hour ago. As Rodriguez loaded the last sack, Maria looked back at the house. She couldn't see Big Tom anywhere, but she knew he had probably changed her life in these few minutes. Not just given her food, but given her a job. A way to support her children with dignity. A future. Ready, ma'am? Rodriguez asked, offering his hand to help her up onto the wagon. Maria took his hand and climbed up. As they started moving toward the gates, she noticed some of the workers watching. One older man with gray hair and weathered skin caught her eye. He looked amazed, like he had just seen something he never expected to see. He nodded at her with what looked like respect. The ride home went much faster than the walk had been. Rodriguez didn't talk much, but he was gentle with the wagon, avoiding the worst ruts in the road. Maria appreciated the quiet. She needed time to think, to process what had happened. When they got close to her small, run-down farmhouse, Maria could see her children waiting on the porch. Rosa must have heard the wagon coming. All 3 children stood up, watching as the wagon approached. Maria could see the hope and fear mixed on their faces. Rodriguez pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. Miguel and Carlos ran down to meet them, with Rosa following more slowly, trying to maintain her dignity as the oldest. Mama! Carlos cried, reaching up for her. You came back! Of course I came back, Maria said, climbing down and scooping him up. He was so light, too light. But that would change now. Did you bring food, Mama? Miguel asked, his eyes wide as he looked at the sacks in the wagon. Yes, my love. We have food! Rodriguez had already started unloading the sacks, carrying them to the porch. Rosa went to help him, though the sacks were almost too heavy for her to lift. This is a lot of food, Mama, Rosa said quietly, looking at her mother with questions in her eyes. I know, sweetheart. God answered our prayers today. Rodriguez finished unloading and tipped his hat to Maria. Boss said to tell you he expects you Monday at dawn. Don't be late. I won't be, Maria assured him. Please tell Mr. Reeves thank you again. Rodriguez nodded and climbed back onto the wagon. As he drove away, Maria's children gathered around her, all talking at once. Can we eat now, Mama? Carlos asked. What happened? Rosa wanted to know. Where did all this come from? Are we going to be okay now? Miguel asked, his voice small and hopeful. Maria looked at her 3 children, their thin faces full of hope for the first time in months. She thought about the ring still on her finger, the ring she had been ready to give away. She thought about Big Tom Reeves, the man everyone said had no heart, who had just given her everything she needed without taking anything in return. Yes, she told her children, pulling them all close. We're going to be okay now. Come on, let's go inside and make a proper dinner, a real dinner with bread and beans and everything. The children cheered and ran toward the house. Rosa hung back for a moment. Mama, she said quietly, who was that man? The one who gave us all this? Maria looked down at her ring, turning it slowly on her finger. Someone who understands loss, she said softly. Someone who knows what it's like to need help even if he won't admit it. Rosa looked confused, but she didn't ask more questions. Instead, she took her mother's hand and they walked into the house together. That night, for the first time in months, the Castellanos family went to bed with full stomachs. Maria lay awake long after her children were asleep, thinking about Monday morning. She would be at that ranch at dawn, ready to work harder than she had ever worked before, not just because she needed the job, but because Big Tom Reeves had given her something more than food. He had given her dignity. He had offered her work instead of charity. He had let her keep her ring, keep her memories, keep her pride. She didn't know why he had helped her. She didn't understand what had made him change his mind. But she was grateful, more grateful than words could express, and she would prove to him that his faith in her was not misplaced. Monday morning came too early, but Maria was already awake. She had barely slept, too nervous about her first day at the Double R Ranch. She dressed in her cleanest dress, which wasn't saying much, and braided her hair neatly. Her children were still asleep, but she had prepared everything they would need for the day. Rosa would be in charge while Maria was gone, at least for this first day. The walk to the ranch felt different this time. Maria's stomach was full from breakfast. Her children had proper food for lunch. She wasn't walking toward desperation anymore. She was walking toward work, toward a future. The sun was just starting to peek over the horizon when she reached the ranch gates. To her surprise, Big Tom was already outside, standing near the barn with Pete, the foreman. They were looking at something on a piece of paper, probably discussing the day's work. Maria hesitated, not wanting to interrupt, but Big Tom looked up and saw her. "You're on time," he said. It wasn't praise, just a statement of fact. "Good." "Yes, sir," Maria replied. Big Tom folded the paper and handed it to Pete. "Mrs. Chen is in the kitchen. She'll show you what needs doing. Thank you." "Sir." Big Tom nodded and walked off toward the cattle pens with Pete. Maria watched him go for a moment, then headed to the house. Mrs. Chen was indeed in the kitchen, a small, elderly woman with sharp eyes and quick movements despite her age. "So you're the one," Mrs. Chen said, looking Maria up and down. "The one who made Boss act human for a change." Maria didn't know what to say to that, so she just smiled politely. Mrs. Chen's stern expression softened slightly. "Well, don't just stand there. There's work to do. Can you cook?" "Yes, ma'am. Can you clean properly?" "I don't mean just pushing dirt around. I mean real cleaning." "Yes, ma'am. My mother taught me well." "Can you sew?" "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Chen nodded, satisfied. "Good. Because this house has been falling apart around Boss's ears for years and he hasn't noticed or hasn't cared. I do my best, but I'm old and my hands hurt. You'll help me get this place back in shape." Over the next few hours, Maria learned exactly what Mrs. Chen meant. The house was clean in the basic sense, but it needed deep attention. Curtains needed washing. Windows needed proper scrubbing. There were clothes that needed mending. The pantry needed organizing. The list went on and on. Maria threw herself into the work. She scrubbed floors until her hands were red. She washed windows until they sparkled. She organized the pantry in a way that made sense. Mrs. Chen watched her work with approval. "You're a hard worker," the older woman said. "That's good. Boss doesn't tolerate laziness." "I'm grateful for the work," Maria said honestly. Mrs. Chen replied, but Maria could tell she was pleased. Around noon, Mrs. Chen told Maria it was time to help prepare lunch for the workers. The ranch employed about 20 men full-time, and they all ate together in a large dining hall attached to the bunkhouse. Maria helped Mrs. Chen prepare a huge pot of stew, fresh bread, and coffee. When the workers came in for lunch, Maria stayed in the kitchen, not sure if she should be seen or not. But Mrs. Chen had other ideas. "Come on," she said. "Help me serve." Maria followed her out to the dining hall. The workers were already seated, talking and laughing. The room went quiet when Maria appeared. She felt their eyes on her, remembered that some of them had watched her desperate plea just a few days ago. But as she and Mrs. Chen moved around the table, serving food, the men nodded politely and thanked her. One by one, the conversation started up again. They were accepting her presence, treating her like she belonged here. It made Maria's throat tight with gratitude. Big Tom came in last, taking a seat at the head of the table. He didn't look at Maria directly, just took his plate when she served him and started eating. But she noticed he nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly. Approval, maybe, or at least acknowledgement that she was doing her job. After lunch, Maria went back to work. The afternoon flew by in a blur of tasks. Washing, scrubbing, organizing, mending. When evening came, Mrs. Chen told her it was time to go home. "Same time tomorrow," the old woman said. "And bring your children. Let's see if they're as good workers as their mother." "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." As Maria prepared to leave, Mrs. Chen handed her a basket. Leftovers from lunch. No point in wasting good food. Maria's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me." "Thank boss. He's the one who told me to send food home with you." Maria looked toward the house, wondering if Big Tom was watching from somewhere, but she saw no one. Just the big, solid house standing in the evening light. The next morning, Maria brought her children. Rosa, Miguel, and little Carlos walked beside her in the early dawn, all of them nervous about this new adventure. When they arrived, Mrs. Chen was waiting. "So these are the children," she said, looking them over like a general inspecting troops. "You," she pointed at Rosa, "can help your mother with the housework. You're pointing at Miguel, will help in the garden and with the chickens. And you," looking at Carlos, "are too small for heavy work. But you can gather eggs and help set tables." The children nodded seriously, ready to prove themselves. Mrs. Chen's expression softened just slightly. "There's breakfast in the kitchen. Go eat first. Can't work on empty stomachs." Maria watched her children file into the kitchen, their eyes wide at the sight of fresh biscuits, eggs, and bacon. Real food, plenty of it. Carlos looked back at his mother with pure joy on his face, and Maria had to blink back tears. Over the next few weeks, a routine developed. Maria and her children would arrive at dawn. They would eat breakfast with Mrs. Chen. Then everyone would scatter to their tasks. Maria cleaned and cooked and mended. Rosa helped with the housework and was learning from Mrs. Chen. Miguel worked in the garden and learned to care for the chickens and smaller animals. Even little Carlos had his jobs, and he took them seriously. The ranch workers grew used to seeing the children around. Miguel especially was curious about everything. He asked the ranch hands endless questions about cattle and horses and ranch work. Most of them were patient with him, explaining things as they worked. One afternoon, Maria was hanging laundry in the yard when she heard laughter. She looked up to see Big Tom walking across the yard with little Carlos on his shoulders. Carlos was laughing with delight, holding onto Big Tom's head for balance. Maria froze, shocked. This was the man everyone said never smiled, never showed warmth, and he was giving her 4-year-old son a shoulder ride. Big Tom caught her eye and looked almost embarrassed. He gently set Carlos down. "Boy wanted to see into the hayloft," he said gruffly, as if he needed to explain himself. "Thank you, sir," Maria said softly. Big Tom nodded and walked away quickly, but Maria noticed something. Just for a second, as he was walking away, she thought she saw the corner of his mouth turn up slightly. Almost like the ghost of a smile. Mrs. Chen had seen it too. That evening, as they were cleaning up the kitchen, the old woman said, "Haven't seen him act like that in 30 years. "Like what?" Maria asked. "Like a person," Mrs. Chen replied. "Like someone who remembers what it's like to be human." Maria wanted to ask what she meant, but Mrs. Chen's expression said the conversation was over. Still, Maria was curious. What had happened 30 years ago? What had turned Big Tom into the hard man everyone feared? A few days later, Maria found out by accident. She was cleaning upstairs, a part of the house she usually didn't work in. Mrs. Chen handled the upstairs rooms, but the older woman's arthritis was bad that day, so she had asked Maria to dust the upstairs hallway. Maria was careful and thorough, dusting every surface. She noticed one door that was different from the others. It looked like it was rarely opened. Curious, she tried the handle, expecting it to be locked. To her surprise, it opened. The room inside took her breath away. Unlike the rest of the house, this room was full of life and memory. There were pictures on the walls, real photographs in frames. A woman's dress hanging in the corner, carefully preserved. Children's toys on a shelf. A hairbrush on the dresser with long dark hairs still in it. Maria realized what she was seeing. This had been a family's room. A wife and children had lived here. The pictures confirmed it. A beautiful woman with warm eyes and a genuine smile. 3 children, 2 boys and a girl gathered around her. And there was Big Tom in the pictures too. But this was a different man. He was younger, smiling, his eyes full of life and joy. His arm was around the woman, and the children were climbing on him, laughing. This was not the stone-faced rancher everyone knew. This was a happy family man. You shouldn't be in here. Maria jumped and turned. Mrs. Chen was standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. I'm so sorry, Maria said quickly. The door was open and I didn't know. Mrs. Chen sighed. Boss must have forgotten to lock it last time he was in here. Last time? He comes in once a month. Sits in that chair. Mrs. Chen pointed to a rocking chair by the window. And just sits. Doesn't touch anything. Just sits and remembers. Maria looked back at the pictures. What happened to them? Mrs. Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then she said fever 30 years ago. Took all 3 of them in 1 week. First the children, then his wife. Boss tried everything. Brought in doctors from as far away as Dallas. But nothing worked. He sat in this room and watched them die one by one and couldn't do anything to stop it. Maria felt her heart break. She looked at the happy faces in the pier. By the end of the first month, news of Big Tom's unexpected kindness had spread through the county like wildfire. In a place where nothing much happened, this was major news. The man who had never shown mercy had not only given food to a desperate widow, but had hired her and her children too. At the general store, people gathered around the counter talking in low voices. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the store with her husband, was the unofficial source of all gossip in the county. I heard he gave her enough food for a year, one woman said, leaning in close. That's not all, Mrs. Patterson added. I heard he's paying her good wages, same as he'd pay any worker, maybe even more, but why? Another woman asked. It doesn't make sense. That's not like Big Tom at all. Maybe he's sweet on her, someone suggested, and several women gasped at the suggestion. That widow? With 3 children? Mrs. Patterson shook her head. I don't think so. Besides, when has Big Tom ever shown interest in any woman since his wife died? Never, that's when. Then why is he helping her? Nobody had a good answer for that. The speculation grew wilder. Some thought Big Tom was getting old and soft. Others worried he was sick and trying to make peace with his conscience before he died. A few darkly suggested he must want something in return, though they couldn't figure out what. The suspicion wasn't just in town. Some of Maria's neighbors came by her little farmhouse one evening, concerned looks on their faces. Maria, her neighbor Mrs. Lopez said carefully, "We're worried about you." Worried? Why, this job at the ranch, with Big Tom Reeves. Mrs. Lopez exchanged glances with the other women. It's not like him to help people. We're wondering what he really wants. Maria felt defensive. He's been nothing but fair to me and my children. We work hard and he pays us fairly. There's nothing wrong with that. But don't you think it's strange? Another neighbor pressed. A man like that suddenly showing kindness? There has to be a catch. The only catch is that I have to work hard, Maria said firmly, which I'm happy to do. My children are eating 3 meals a day. We have a future now. I won't question why he chose to help us. I'm just grateful he did. The women left, but Maria could tell they weren't convinced. She knew they meant well, but their suspicions hurt. Couldn't people just accept that maybe, just maybe, Big Tom had a good reason for helping her, or that maybe he was simply being kind? At church that Sunday, the whispers continued. Maria sat with her children in their usual pew, trying to ignore the stares and murmurs. After the service, the pastor, Father Michael, asked to speak with her. I've heard about your new position at the Double R Ranch, he said kindly. Yes, Father. It's been a blessing for my family. Father Michael nodded slowly. I'm glad you and your children are being cared for. God works in mysterious ways. But Maria, I want you to be careful. Big Tom Reeves is not known for his generosity. If there's ever any trouble, any reason for concern, please come to me. Even the priest suspected something was wrong. Maria felt frustration building. Father, with respect, maybe we should give people the benefit of the doubt. Maybe Big Tom is exactly what he appears to be in this case, an employer who needed workers and found them in me and my children. Perhaps you're right, Father Michael said, though he didn't look entirely convinced. I hope you're right. The speculation reached its peak at the weekly card game that Pete, the foreman, attended with some of the local ranchers. They met every Thursday night at the saloon, playing poker and discussing business. So what's the story with Big Tom and that widow? Asked Mr. Griffith, who owned the ranch next to the Double R. Everyone's talking about it. Pete was loyal to his boss, but even he had been surprised by Big Tom's actions. No story. He needed help around the house. She needed work. Simple as that. Nothing's ever simple with Big Tom, Griffith countered. Man's been hard as nails for 30 years. Now suddenly he's hiring widows and letting children run around his ranch? Something's changed. Maybe he's just getting practical, Pete suggested. Mrs. Chen is getting old. The house needed attention. Mrs. Castellanos is a good worker. Makes sense from a business standpoint. Business standpoint? Another rancher laughed. He gave her food before she even started working. That's not business. That's charity. And Big Tom doesn't do charity. Pete couldn't argue with that. He had been as surprised as anyone when Big Tom had loaded up those sacks of food and sent them home with Maria. In 15 years of working for the man, Pete had never seen him do anything like it. I'll tell you what I think, Griffith said, laying down his cards. I think he's losing his edge. Getting soft. And when a man like Big Tom gets soft, his empire starts to crumble. Might be opportunities there for the rest of us? Pete didn't like the sound of that. Boss is as sharp as ever, he said firmly. Don't mistake kindness for weakness. But even as he said it, Pete wondered. Was Big Tom changing? And if so, why? Back at the ranch, Big Tom was aware of the talk. Rodriguez had mentioned it when picking up supplies in town. Mrs. Chen had heard it at the market. Even some of the ranch hands had started giving him odd looks, as if trying to figure out what had gotten into him. Big Tom didn't care what people thought. He never had, but he found himself thinking about it anyway, usually late at night when he couldn't sleep. Why had he helped Maria? He still wasn't entirely sure himself. The practical reasons made sense. Mrs. Chen did need help. The house had needed attention. Maria was a hard worker. Her children were respectful and willing to learn. From a business perspective, it was a good decision, but Big Tom knew it was more than that. Something about that moment when Maria had held out her ring with such desperate courage had gotten through his defenses. Maybe it was the mention of her children. Maybe it was the way she had been willing to sacrifice everything for them. Maybe it was just that she had reminded him of something he had tried to forget for 30 years. Whatever the reason, he had made his decision, and he wasn't going to second-guess it now. People could talk all they wanted. It didn't change anything. What Big Tom didn't expect was how Maria's presence, and especially her children's presence, would affect him. He tried to maintain his distance to keep his interactions strictly professional. But it was hard. Little Carlos had no fear of him. The boy would wave and smile whenever he saw Big Tom, as if they were old friends. Miguel asked him questions about everything, genuinely interested in how the ranch worked. And Rosa, the oldest, had started bringing him coffee in the morning without being asked, somehow knowing exactly how he liked it. And Maria herself was changing things in subtle ways. The house felt different, warmer somehow. There were fresh flowers on the dining table. The smell of baking bread filled the air in the afternoon. Small touches that made the place feel less like a building and more like a home. Big Tom noticed all of this, but he didn't comment on it. He just went about his business, working from dawn to dusk as he always had. If people thought he was going soft, let them think it. He knew who he was. But one evening something happened that shook even Big Tom's carefully maintained walls. He had been working late in the barn, checking on a sick calf. When he came back to the house, it was dark except for a light in the kitchen. He walked in to find Maria still there, long after she should have gone home. She was at the stove, stirring something in a pot. When she heard him come in, she turned and smiled. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to stay so late. But I noticed you hadn't eaten dinner and I thought—" She trailed off, suddenly uncertain. Big Tom stared at her. Nobody worried about whether he ate dinner. Nobody cared about things like that. "I made stew," Maria continued nervously. "It's probably not fancy, but it's hot and filling. I can leave it for you if you'd like to eat alone, or I can serve you a bowl now. Whatever you prefer." Big Tom didn't know what to say. This small act of kindness, this simple gesture of caring had caught him completely off guard. He stood there, this giant of a man who had built an empire and crushed anyone who stood in his way, rendered speechless by a widow offering him a bowl of stew. A bowl now would be fine, he finally managed to say. Maria's face lit up with a smile. She quickly served him a generous portion, set it on the table with fresh bread and butter, and poured him coffee. Then she moved to leave. "You should eat too," Big Tom said suddenly. "You've been here all day, sit." Maria hesitated, but something in his tone made it clear it wasn't really a request. She served herself a small portion and sat down across from him, careful to maintain a respectful distance. They ate in silence at first. But it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of quiet that comes when two people are both lost in their own thoughts but comfortable sharing the space. "Your children are good kids," Big Tom said finally. "They work hard. Thank you, sir. I've tried to raise them right. You've done well. Your husband would be proud." Maria's eyes misted up at that. "I hope so. He was a good man. He tried so hard to make the farm work." Big Tom nodded. He understood trying hard and still failing. He understood loss. They sat in silence a bit longer, and somehow in that quiet kitchen with 2 bowls of stew between them, some of the suspicion and whispers from town seemed far away and unimportant. What mattered was this: 2 people who had both known loss, both known struggle, sharing a simple meal, no ulterior motives, no hidden agenda. 3 months had passed since Maria started working at the Double R Ranch, and life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Her children were thriving. Rosa had put on weight and her face had color in it again. Miguel was learning so much about ranch work that he could talk for hours about cattle and horses. Even little Carlos was growing stronger, his laughter filling the ranch house in ways it hadn't heard in decades. Maria herself had changed too. The desperate, frightened woman who had walked through those gates with her grandmother's ring was gone. In her place was someone more confident, someone who walked with her head up. She was good at her job and she knew it. The house had never been better maintained. The meals were delicious and hearty. Even the ranch hands complimented the food, which Mrs. Chen said never used to happen. But Maria still wondered about Big Tom. She had seen glimpses of the man behind the walls. The way he sometimes watched her children with an expression she couldn't quite read. The small kindnesses he showed but never acknowledged. The way he had sat with her that evening over stew, almost like a normal person having a normal conversation. Mrs. Chen had told her the basic facts about what happened 30 years ago, but Maria wanted to understand more. Not out of gossip or curiosity, but because she felt like understanding Big Tom's pain might help her understand how to work with him better, how to help bring more of those rare smiles to his face. One afternoon, Maria was cleaning the study. It was Big Tom's private space, and she usually only dusted quickly and left. But today she was doing a deeper clean, organizing papers and books with Mrs. Chen's permission. She was careful not to look at anything private, just straightening and organizing. But as she moved a stack of old papers, something fell out and fluttered to the floor. It was a letter, yellowed with age, written in delicate handwriting. Maria picked it up, intending to put it back without reading it. But her eyes caught the first line before she could stop herself. "My dearest Tom, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it." Maria's breath caught. She knew she shouldn't read it. This was private, intimate, but something made her keep reading, standing there in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the window. "I know you're strong, my love, strong enough to survive this even though I know it will break your heart. But please, Tom, don't let this destroy who you are. You're the kindest, most generous man I've ever known. Don't let losing us turn you into something hard and bitter. Our children loved you so much. They looked at you like you hung the moon and stars. Remember that, love. Hold on to it. Don't lock it away because it hurts too much to remember. And Tom, please eventually let yourself live again. You have so much love to give. Don't waste the rest of your life punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault. The fever took us, not you. You did everything you could. I need you to promise me something. Promise me that someday, when enough time has passed, you'll open your heart again. Maybe not to romance, I know that might be too much to ask, but to friendship, to kindness, to helping others the way you always wanted to help people. Don't become the hard man I know you're capable of being. Stay the man I fell in love with. The man who cried when our first baby was born. The man who gave away half our supplies one winter to help the Henderson family when they were struggling. The man with the biggest heart in Texas, please, my darling. For me, for our children. Don't let this be the end of your kindness. Let it be a seed that grows into something beautiful even if it takes years. I love you forever. Elena. Maria's hands were shaking as she finished reading. Tears were streaming down her face. She carefully refolded the letter and put it back exactly where it had been. Then she sat down in the chair by the window, trying to compose herself. This explained everything. Elena had asked him not to become hard, but he had anyway. The pain had been too much. He had locked away his kindness, his generosity, everything that made him the man she had loved. For 30 years he had been living as a shadow of who he once was. But something had changed when Maria came to him that day. Something about her desperate plea about 3 children who needed help had cracked through those walls. Maybe it was Elena's letter buried in his memory. Maybe it was just time finally healing old wounds. Whatever it was, Big Tom was starting to become himself again, even if he didn't realize it. Maria heard footsteps and quickly stood up, wiping her eyes. Big Tom appeared in the doorway, looking surprised to see her there. "Just finishing up the cleaning, sir," Maria said, trying to keep her voice steady. Big Tom looked at her more closely. "You all right? You look upset." "I'm fine," Maria said, but fresh tears came anyway. She couldn't help it. The letter had broken something open in her chest. "You don't look fine," Big Tom said, actually stepping into the room. "What happened?" Maria took a shaky breath. She could lie, make up something. But she found she didn't want to. "I found a letter," she admitted. "From your wife." "I didn't mean to read it, but I did, and I'm sorry." "I shouldn't have." Big Tom's face went pale. "Elena's letter. I'm so sorry," Maria repeated. "I had no right." Big Tom walked to the desk and found the letter where Maria had replaced it. He held it for a long moment, not opening it. "I haven't read this in years," he said softly. "I used to read it every day the first year after she died. Then it hurt too much, so I stopped." "She loved you very much," Maria said quietly. "And she knew you. She knew exactly who you were." "Was," Big Tom corrected, his voice rough. "Who I was." "No," Maria said, surprising herself with her boldness. "Who you are. You're still that man, Mr. Reeves, the man she wrote to, the man with a big heart. You just forgot for a while." Big Tom looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since she had started working there. "You think so?" "I know so. I've seen it. The way you gave us food when we needed it. The way you offered me work with dignity instead of charity. The way you carry Carlos on your shoulders when you think no one's watching. The way you taught Miguel to rope last week. The way you slipped Rosa that book about ranching and told her education was important." Big Tom looked startled. "You noticed all that?" "I notice everything, sir. It's my job to pay attention, and what I see is a man who's been trying very hard to be hard but keeps being kind anyway, almost like he can't help it." Big Tom was quiet for a long time. Then he did something unexpected. He sat down heavily in his chair and put his head in his hands. For a moment Maria thought he might be crying, though no sound came out. "I failed her," he said finally, his voice muffled. "She asked me not to become this, and I did anyway. I became everything she didn't want me to be." "But you're changing back," Maria said gently, moving closer. "Maybe it took 30 years, but you're finding your way back to who you were. Who she wanted you to be." "Because of you," Big Tom said, looking up at her. "Because of your children. When you came here that day, holding out that ring, willing to give up everything for your kids, it reminded me of Elena. She would have done the same thing. Hell, she did do the same thing when our first child was sick. Sold her mother's jewelry to pay for a doctor. So that's why you helped me," Maria said, understanding finally clicking into place. "That's part of it," Big Tom admitted. "But it was also the children. 3 children, same as I had. When you mentioned them, all I could see was my own kids. I couldn't turn you away. It would have been like turning away my own family." Maria's heart ached for him. 30 years of pain, locked away, finally finding a way to come out. "Your wife would be proud of you," she said softly. "For helping us. For giving us a chance, maybe," Big Tom said doubtfully. "Or maybe she'd be angry it took me so long. She'd understand. Grief doesn't have a timeline. Everyone heals at their own pace." Big Tom picked up the letter again, running his fingers over the worn paper. "You know what the hardest part is? I can barely remember their voices anymore. I remember what Elena looked like, what the children looked like, but their voices are gone. I'd give anything to hear them one more time." Maria understood that pain. Sometimes she struggled to remember her husband's laugh. "But you remember how they made you feel," she said. "That's what matters. The love doesn't fade even when the details do." They sat in silence for a while. 2 people who understood loss in ways they wished they didn't. Finally, Big Tom stood up and carefully put Elena's letter back in his desk drawer. "Thank you," he said simply, "for reading it, for understanding, for not judging me. There's nothing to judge, sir. You're a good man who went through something terrible. You did what you had to do to survive." "I'm trying to be better," Big Tom said. "Your family being here, it's helping. Having children's laughter in this house again, it's like— He paused, searching for words. It's like something frozen is finally starting to thaw. Maria smiled through her tears. Then we're helping each other, sir. Because you saved us when we had nowhere else to turn. You gave us life when we were dying. Fair trade, I'd say. Big Tom almost smiled. Almost. Fair trade, he agreed. From that day forward, something shifted between them. Not inappropriately, nothing like the gossips in town whispered about. But there was understanding now. Recognition of shared pain, shared survival, shared hope for something better. Big Tom started joining them for meals more often. 6 months had passed since that day in the study when Maria read Elena's letter. The changes in Big Tom were no longer subtle. The ranch workers noticed it first. Pete told the others one evening over dinner that the boss had actually cracked a joke that morning. An actual joke. It wasn't particularly funny, but the fact that he'd made one at all was remarkable. Never thought I'd see the day, Rodriguez said, shaking his head in wonder. Boss man actually smiling and making jokes. What's next? Him joining us for cards? Don't push it, Pete laughed. But even he had to admit things were different. Better. The transformation wasn't just in Big Tom's mood. It showed in his actions too. When one of the ranch hands, a young man named Danny, got kicked by a horse and broke his leg, Big Tom not only paid for the doctor but kept him on full wages while he healed. The old Big Tom would have replaced him immediately. When a neighboring farmer's barn burned down, Big Tom showed up with lumber and half his crew to help rebuild. He didn't make a big deal of it, just showed up at dawn and started working. The farmer was so shocked he could barely speak. But Big Tom just nodded and kept hammering. The county started seeing a different man. And slowly, the whispers changed from suspicious to surprised to respectful. But the biggest changes happened at home, in the ranch house where Maria and her children spent their days. It was there that Big Tom truly let his guard down, bit by bit revealing the man Elena had loved and the man he was becoming again. It started with small things. Big Tom began asking Maria's opinion on household matters. What color should they paint the kitchen? Did she think they needed new curtains? Should they expand the garden? At first, Maria was hesitant to answer, not wanting to overstep. But Big Tom genuinely wanted her input, and slowly she began to feel like this was becoming her home too, not just her workplace. Miguel had become Big Tom's shadow. The boy was fascinated by everything about ranching, and Big Tom found himself enjoying teaching him. They would spend hours together, Big Tom explaining how to read the weather, how to know when a cow was about to calve, how to fix a fence properly. Miguel soaked up every word like a sponge. One afternoon, as they were mending a fence together, Miguel asked, "Mr. Tom, did you always want to be a rancher?" Big Tom hammered in a nail before answering, "No, son. When I was young, I wanted to be a teacher." Miguel looked surprised. "Really? What changed?" "Life changed," Big Tom said simply. "I came out here with nothing, needed to make money fast. Ranching was what I could do. Turns out I was good at it. Do you ever regret it? Not being a teacher, I mean?" Big Tom looked at the boy, really looked at him. Miguel's earnest face, his genuine curiosity, his eagerness to learn. "You know what? I think I'm being a teacher now. Just teaching different lessons," Miguel beamed. "You're a good teacher, Mr. Tom. The best I've ever had." Something in Big Tom's chest felt tight. "Thank you, son. That means more than you know." Rosa had found her own place in Big Tom's life. She was smart, sharp with numbers and details. Big Tom had started letting her help him with the ranch accounts in the evenings. She had a head for business that impressed him. "You've got a good mind for this," he told her one evening as they reviewed the month's expenses. "Ever think about running a business someday?" "I'm a girl," Rosa said matter-of-factly. "Girls don't run businesses, says who?" Big Tom countered. "My wife ran this ranch right alongside me. She was better with the books than I ever was. Being a girl doesn't mean you can't do anything you set your mind to." Rosa looked at him with new eyes. "Really? Really. You keep learning, keep working hard, and there's no limit to what you can do." From that day on, Rosa studied the ranch accounts with new dedication. She started asking Big Tom questions about his business decisions, learning not just how to keep books but how to think strategically. Big Tom found he enjoyed having someone to discuss business with, someone whose questions made him think more carefully about his choices. But it was little Carlos who had captured Big Tom's heart most completely. The 4-year-old had absolutely no fear of the giant rancher. He would run up to Big Tom demanding to be lifted, insisting on shoulder rides, chattering constantly about whatever was on his mind. At first, Big Tom had tried to maintain his distance, but Carlos was impossible to resist. The boy's pure joy, his innocent love, his complete trust wore down Big Tom's defenses faster than anything else could have. One evening, Maria came looking for Carlos and found him in Big Tom's study. The little boy was curled up in Big Tom's lap, fast asleep while Big Tom sat in his chair reading reports. One massive hand was protectively rested on Carlos's back. Big Tom looked up and saw Maria in the doorway. "He came in to show me a drawing," Big Tom explained quietly. "Then he just climbed up and fell asleep." "I can take him," Maria whispered, moving forward. "It's all right," Big Tom said. "Let him sleep a bit longer." "I don't mind." Maria's eyes filled with tears at the tenderness in his voice. This was the man Elena had written about. This was the man with a big heart who loved children. He had been buried under grief for 30 years, but he was back. As the months passed, something extraordinary happened. What started as an employer-employee relationship evolved into something much deeper. Friendship. Real. Genuine friendship based on mutual respect and understanding. Maria no longer felt like she was working for Big Tom. She felt like she was working with him, as a partner in keeping the household running. She made decisions about the house without asking permission. She planned menus, organized repairs, even hired help for bigger projects. Big Tom trusted her judgment completely, and Maria trusted him in return. She talked to him about her worries, her dreams for her children, her fears about the future. Big Tom listened, really listened, and offered advice that was thoughtful and kind. They started having coffee together every morning, a routine that began by accident but became sacred. They would sit at the kitchen table, drinking coffee as the sun came up, and talk about everything and nothing. Ranch business, the children's progress, memories of the past, hopes for the future. One morning, Big Tom said something that surprised them both. "You know, I think you might be the best friend I've had in 30 years. Maria smiled. "Probably because I'm the only friend you've had in 30 years. Big Tom laughed, an actual full laugh. "Fair point, but still true." "You're my best friend too," Maria said simply. "You and Mrs. Chen, you both saved my life. Not just by giving me work, but by giving me hope." "You saved mine first," Big Tom said quietly. "You just didn't know it at the time." The friendship wasn't just between Big Tom and Maria, it extended to the whole family. Big Tom became a grandfather figure to the children, teaching them, protecting them, loving them in ways he probably didn't even realize. When Miguel fell out of a tree and broke his arm, Big Tom carried him all the way to town to see the doctor, refusing to let anyone else do it. He sat with the boy during the painful process of setting the bone, holding his hand and telling him stories to distract him. When Rosa got into trouble at school for arguing with a teacher who said girls shouldn't learn mathematics, Big Tom marched down to that school and had a long conversation with the principal. Rosa wasn't punished, and the teacher apologized. Big Tom made it clear that any child under his protection would be treated fairly, regardless of gender. When Carlos had nightmares after hearing a scary story from some older kids, it was Big Tom who sat with him at night until he fell back asleep. His deep voice reading gentle stories until the fear passed. The children started calling him Uncle Tom. Not to his face at first, but Maria overheard them talking. "Uncle Tom taught me how to track rabbits today," Miguel would say. "Uncle Tom says I'm good with numbers," Rosa would mention proudly. "Uncle Tom gave me a cookie," Carlos would announce with delight. One day, Carlos slipped and called him Uncle Tom directly. The little boy froze, worried he'd done something wrong. But Big Tom just smiled and said, "That's fine, son. I like that." From then on, he was Uncle Tom to all 3 children, and Big Tom wore the title like a badge of honor. Mrs. Chen watched all of this unfold with quiet satisfaction. "I told you Boss was coming back to life," she said to Maria one afternoon. "But it's more than that now. He's not just alive. He's happy. First time in 3 decades I've seen him actually happy." "The children love him," Maria said. "And he loves them. It's healing him." "It's healing all of you," Mrs. Chen observed wisely. "You lost a father for those children. They lost a family. Now you found each other. It's not the same as what you lost, but it's something good. Something real, she was right. What they had built together was something special. Not replacing what they had lost, but creating something new and beautiful from the broken pieces. Big Tom started joining them for Sunday dinners, a tradition Maria had begun. She would cook a special meal, and they would all sit together around the big dining table. They would talk and laugh and tell stories. Sometimes Big Tom would talk about the old days before the tragedy, about Elena and his children, about the good times. At first, these memories came with pain, but slowly the pain gave way to something sweeter, joy in remembering, gratitude for the time he had with them, peace with the past. Elena would have liked you, Big Tom told Maria one Sunday evening after the children had gone to play. 2 years had passed since Maria first walked through the gates of the Double R Ranch. Standing in the exact same spot now, she could hardly believe how much had changed. The desperate, frightened widow who had offered her wedding ring was gone. In her place stood a confident woman with a thriving family and a future bright with possibility. The Castellanos farm had been transformed. With Big Tom's guidance and financial backing, Maria had learned everything about sustainable ranching. The land that had defeated her husband now flourished under her care. She raised cattle, grew crops that were suited to the Texas climate, and even had a small dairy operation. Big Tom had structured it as a business partnership, teaching her every aspect of running a successful ranch while letting her make the final decisions. Miguel, now 9 years old, was already helping run their small operation. Big Tom had taught him well, and the boy had a natural talent for working with animals. He would take what he learned at the Double R Ranch each day and apply it to their own farm. He talked about expanding their herd someday, about trying new techniques he'd read about. Rosa had blossomed into a sharp young businesswoman at 12. She kept the books for both their farm and helped Big Tom with the ranch accounts. She had plans to go to business college someday, something that would have been impossible before. Big Tom was already setting aside money for her education, though he pretended it was just payment for her excellent bookkeeping. Even little Carlos, now 6, had his role. He gathered eggs, fed the chickens, and helped his mother with the smaller tasks. But more importantly, he had brought joy back into Big Tom's life in a way nothing else could. The boy's laughter, his innocent questions, his absolute trust had melted the last of the ice around Big Tom's heart. But the changes went far beyond one family. Big Tom had become a different man, and that difference rippled out into the entire community. It started small. A ranch hand mentioned that his sister's family was struggling after a bad harvest. Instead of ignoring it, Big Tom asked questions. How many children did they have? What did they need? Within a week, he had offered the man's brother-in-law a job at the ranch and made sure the family had food until they got back on their feet. Word spread. When anyone in the county hit hard times, they knew they could come to Big Tom Reeves. He wouldn't just give handouts, though. He offered work, taught skills, created opportunities for people to rebuild their lives with dignity. Just like he had done for Maria, he established what he called the Ranch Work Program. Anyone who was struggling could come to the Double R and learn ranching skills while earning wages. Some stayed for a few months and moved on. Others stayed longer, saving money and learning until they could start their own operations. Big Tom helped several families purchase small plots of land, offering them the same kind of partnership deal he had given Maria. The foreclosures stopped completely. When Big Tom held debt on a property now, he worked with the families instead of against them. He restructured payments, offered advice, sent his best workers to help during critical times. Not a single farm was lost during those 2 years. Instead, several struggling operations turned around and became successful. Pete, the foreman, joked that Big Tom had gone from the most feared man in 3 counties to the most beloved. But it wasn't a joke, really. It was true. The church in town received an anonymous donation large enough to not just fix the roof, but add a new community room. Everyone knew it came from Big Tom, but he never admitted it. When the school needed new books, they appeared. When the clinic needed equipment, it was purchased. Always anonymously, always without fanfare. Boss is trying to make up for 30 years of being hard, Pete told Rodriguez one evening. No, Rodriguez disagreed. He's not making up for anything. He's just being who he really is, who he was always meant to be. Pete thought about that and realized the younger man was right. This wasn't penance. This was Big Tom finally living according to his true nature, the nature that grief had buried for 3 decades. The transformation affected even those who had feared him most. Mr. Griffith, the neighboring rancher who had talked about taking advantage of Big Tom's weakness, came to him one day with a problem. His cattle were sick and he didn't know what to do. The old Big Tom would have seen it as an opportunity, maybe offered to buy the herd at a discount. The new Big Tom rode over with his best ranch hand, diagnosed the problem, and helped treat the cattle. He didn't charge a penny. When Griffith tried to pay him, Big Tom refused. "We're neighbors," Big Tom said simply. "Neighbors help each other." Griffith never forgot that. He became one of Big Tom's staunchest defenders, telling anyone who would listen about the rancher's generosity and knowledge. But it was in his own home that Big Tom's transformation was most evident. The cold, empty house had become warm and full of life. Maria still worked there, but it felt less like employment and more like family taking care of each other. Mrs. Chen had officially retired, though she still came by most days just to visit and boss everyone around in her gentle way. The locked room upstairs, the shrine to Big Tom's lost family, had finally been opened properly. Maria had suggested gently that maybe it was time to let it become part of the house again instead of a sealed-off memory. Big Tom had resisted at first, but eventually he agreed. Together, they had carefully gone through everything. The photographs were framed and hung throughout the house, so Elena and the children became part of the home's living memory instead of a hidden past. Their clothes were donated to families who needed them, something Elena would have wanted. The toys were given to children in town, bringing joy to new kids the way they once had to Big Tom's children. The room itself became Rosa's bedroom, with Big Tom's blessing. Elena would like knowing a smart young girl was using this space, he said. She'd want it to be full of life and dreams again. Big Tom kept one photograph in his study, a family portrait of all 5 of them together, everyone smiling. But it no longer hurt to look at it. Now it made him smile too, remembering the good times instead of just mourning the loss. One Sunday afternoon, almost exactly 2 years after Maria's first desperate visit, the whole extended family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Maria's farm had turned its first real profit, and Big Tom had insisted on marking the occasion. The dining table, which had sat empty for so many years, was crowded with people. Maria and her children, of course, Mrs. Chen and her daughter who had come to visit, Pete and some of the ranch hands who had become like family. Even Father Michael from the church was there, amazed at the transformation he'd witnessed in Big Tom. As they ate and talked and laughed, Big Tom looked around the table and felt something he hadn't felt in 30 years. Complete happiness. Not the absence of pain, but joy strong enough to coexist with the scars of the past. After dinner, as the children played outside and the adults relaxed with coffee, Father Michael spoke up. "Tom, I have to say what you've done these past 2 years has been remarkable. The number of families you've helped, the lives you've changed, it's inspired the whole community." Big Tom shook his head. "I'm just doing what I should have been doing all along." "Maybe," Maria said softly. "But you're doing it now. That's what matters." "Elena would be proud," Mrs. Chen added. "Very proud." Big Tom touched the wedding ring he still wore after all these years. "I hope so. I finally did what she asked in her letter. Took me 30 years, but I got there." "What letter?" Father Michael asked. Big Tom looked at Maria, who nodded encouragingly. So he told them about Elena's final letter, about her plea for him not to let grief destroy his kindness, about how he had failed her for 3 decades, locking away his heart and becoming hard. But then Maria came, Big Tom said, looking at her with genuine affection. "And she reminded me of what I'd lost. Not just my family, but myself. She gave me a reason to try again." "We gave each other reasons," Maria corrected gently. "I was drowning and you threw me a rope. Then I threw one back to you. That's how it works." Father Michael wiped his eyes. "That's beautiful." "It really is. And Tom, I don't think you failed, Elena. You grieved deeply because you loved deeply. That's not failure, and you found your way back. That's triumph." As the sun set that evening and guests started leaving, Maria and her children were the last to go. Carlos had fallen asleep on the couch, and Big Tom carried him out to the wagon, the boy's head on his shoulder. "Same time tomorrow?" Big Tom asked as he gently placed Carlos in the wagon. "Always," Maria promised. "Though I think we both know this stopped being about work a long time ago." "Family," Big Tom agreed. That's what this is. Family, Maria repeated, and she meant it with her whole heart. As they drove away, Big Tom stood in the yard and watched them go. He thought about the desperate woman who had walked up this same path 2 years ago, offering her wedding ring just to feed her children. He thought about how close he'd come to turning her away like he'd turned away so many others. What if he had? He would still be alone, bitter, living half a life. Maria and her children would have continued struggling, maybe not survived. So many opportunities for kindness missed, so many lives left unhelped. But he hadn't turned her away. Something in that moment, some small crack in the walls he'd built, had let her in.